Hello again, and welcome to today's webinar about finding evidence of corruption money laundering with open data. We are going to start now. So first, a quick word of introduction. I'm delighted to join Frederic Lindenberg for today's session.
Hi there.
So Frederic is working on the OpenSanctions project, where he's the founder. And as for myself, my name is Villedieu, and I'm the managing director at Linkurious, a company that provides an investigation platforms. So you can see today's agenda. First, we'll discuss open data and financial crime investigations. What is the connection between these two topics? Then we will dive into the challenges of open data. And for that, we will use a very concrete example, the sanctions list. Then we will do an introduction to open sanctions, because I'm sure that some of you are curious about open sanctions. We will then see a demo putting in action OpenSanctions and Linkurious Enterprise in a concrete use case. And after that, we will discuss a little bit how to apply everything that we have seen during the webinar in practice. But first, open data and financial crime investigations. As a regulated institution or a government agency, there's only so much that your internal data can tell you about the people and organizations whose riskiness you need to evaluate. There are open data sources, such as company registries or sanctions lists that can help identify money laundering, fraud, terrorism, and other risks. And this information is very helpful to help regulated institutions and government agency fighting back against financial crime. Even more so, ignoring this information poses a great threat to any regulated institution, because they're expected to leverage this information into their investigations. But now let's discuss a little bit the challenges of open data. And for that, we will use a concrete example, the world of sanctions lists. So first, in theory, this data is readily accessible to anyone. It's online and available for free. And an example of that would be the OFAC sanctions list. You can go ahead and get access to that in seconds, simply by using your favorite search engine. But the thing is that in practice, there are actually hundreds of potential data sources, and each comes with its own particularities, its own format, and its own peculiarities, I guess. So looking up a name in a single data source, that's easy. You can type the name of Frederic, for example, and use the OFAC sanctions list to see if there's a hit or something. And you can do that fairly easily, I guess. But when you want to industrialize that and actually consolidate all these sanctions list sources and continuously integrate them into your investigation, that becomes a much different effort. Of course, there are companies out there such as Refinitiv, LexisNexis, and others that are providing commercial solutions around that very specific problem.
Yeah, so why do this differently? So maybe I should speak a little bit about my background, which is I've been working for the past 8 years or so in investigative reporting, and for the last 6 years, I was working at the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, which has been doing a lot of work on offshore finance and money laundering investigations. And during that time, you realize that investigative journalists, just like people who are inside of financial institutions and government, have this massive need to understand who are the people that we need to keep an eye out for and who need to be monitored more closely. And what we also found is that first of all, we're priced out of accessing these commercial products. So no journalist organization in the world can afford the fees for Refinitiv or LexisNexis. But also, we don't quite know how these lists come together. So after leaving also CIP in May last year, I decided I wanted to actually think about how can we do sanctions data and due diligence data differently? How can we actually change how people access that data by building an open source asset, right? So far, these data sources are always highly proprietary collections. They're made by intransparent methods in order to provide materials for financial institutions, governments, etc., to do vetting. But what if we actually took this entire process to the open? So what OpenSanctions does at its core is that it assembles data from a great number of sources. We have over 20 sanctions lists covering most of the big jurisdictions in the world, whether it's the US, Europe, Switzerland, Ukraine, Russia, all of these. But we're also importing increasingly data about politically exposed persons, or PEPs. That in turn, we're taking from a partner project who cover over 200 different websites, government, cabinet websites, parliamentary websites, etc., etc. And so the idea behind OpenSanctions is to take all of this data and integrate it into a common and coherent format, to also look at, for example, making the data more clean than it is often in those source data formats, and also trying to bring together data on individual entities from different sources. What's special about OpenSanctions is that it's incredibly open, right? So you can just go to the website right now, download our entire data set, and start playing with it. What we do request is that commercial users actually make a commitment at some point to support the ongoing maintenance of our project and acquire a license so that we can continue doing this as a reliable foundation for people who want to build cool technology or want to build their own in-house processes on this data. The data itself is published in multiple formats, from a very simple CSV file, where you just have a table of individuals that are of interest, whether they're sanctioned or politicians, to a rich graph of entities that we're going to look at today, that really lends itself to being imported into a graph store like Linkurious. So why is this a good idea? I think like one thing I've already mentioned is this question of transparency, of like really knowing how the sausage is made, of having a fully transparent process, of having it also reproducible and built on public sources. So OpenSanctions is really trying to consolidate all the best public data sources in terms of who are people that we need to keep an eye on, whether it's in order to retain sanctions compliance or in order to also look at a broader kind of KYC thing. It's a clear and coherent structure. So we've been doing a lot of work on trying to kind of make that data fit together, trying to enforce really a high quality of data and a really intuitive structure for the material. Also to have richness in, for example, how many different spellings of names there are, so that people who build matching technology it can have a rich set of data to match against. And one thing that's really cool in my mind is we do offer an API service, but one thing that's kind of really unique is that we actually prefer it if people run that API or run their own APIs in-house, so that basically people run on their own infrastructure a matching service that they then send their customer data through, download the OpenSanctions data in order to do the matching, but never actually upload their customer data to us. So in that sense, what we're trying to also do is to find like more privacy preserving ways of doing KYC, so that you download the sanctions data and don't actually kind of submit it to a provider in the cloud. And finally, and this is important to me, is that OpenSanctions is entirely free to use as a resource for media organizations, NGOs, people who do work in the public interest and who would need access to this data but are otherwise priced out of it. So, for example, one of the investigations that's used OpenSanctions for cross-referencing, for finding leads, is the Swiss Secrets investigation that just came out on Sunday, in which we used OpenSanctions data to kind of find who are the interesting people amongst a set of 18,000 account holders of Credit Suisse, basically using it to find these leads is, I think, a really big case for doing this, both in data journalism, which is my home, which in a way could be described as adversarial due diligence, right? It's due diligence after your data has already left your building. But obviously, the better solution is to do this before a group of investigative journalists get their hands on the data. So thinking about how do you do really good know your customer procedures as you onboard new customers in a financial institution, as you kind of periodically check whether their status has changed, but then also once you find actual evidence that they might require further due diligence, how do you kind of design that process? And I think kind of designing that due diligence process and AML investigations is something where Linkurious then steps in as a product and helps you to kind of be systematic about how to what entities require further scrutiny and how your team handles that. I want to get a bit more technical in this presentation about how OpenSanctions works. OpenSanctions is based on a data model called Follow the Money. You can still see the origins there in investigative reporting. So what Follow the Money is a graph ontology for anti-corruption investigations. And this was developed at OCCRP as a tool for investigative reporting. So it very much speaks the language that reporters would talk to each other. And what it does for us is it serves as a data nexus, right? So you can take data from a broad range of different sources, whether it's a random CSV file for somewhere on the internet, relational databases, a scraper, a crawler script, etc. Bring it together into a coherent format. And that then also enables you to do better record linkage, right? So I feel like if you have data in a variety of formats and you're trying to find links between the data sets to say these people in that data set are the same people as those in that data set, that's a really tough ask. But if you first convert data into a kind of coherent format, then you have a much broader range of strategies available to you. And so then Follow the Money, which by the way is also open source technology that I would really invite people to play with, kind of enables exports into a broad range of formats where you can then do analytical work, including Neo4j, which is the backend store for Linkurious, but also other tools like Gephi or even a triple store if you're so inclined. Just a very quick look, basically, like what I find interesting is how do we model this domain? And I think there's actually a surprising amount of coherence in what kind of material you look at when you look at anti-corruption or anti-money laundering investigations, right? You always have the same basic units. So whether you have the idea of a person, you need the idea of a company that can be involved in things. Very often you also then need, for example, the idea of a piece of real estate or a vessel or an aircraft that's owned by a company or a person. And what this diagram, this is only part of the model of Follow the Money, doesn't show is obviously the connectivity between these things. So what relationships can exist between a person and an organization or a person and a piece of real estate, whether it's ownership, whether it's having a debt or even a payment between a company and a person. And I find it really interesting to think about, okay, if this language is somewhat coherent, then can we basically start adopting internal ontologies as organizations, model data from a broad variety of sources into it, and then get a coherent view on it. And I think that's much of the promise of graph databases as well, is to kind of enable that coherent view. So going further, what I really find as fascinating as well is kind of the design decisions that you make as you design a graph, right? So what I find interesting is that graphs, to me, the more I work with them and I think about them, they're not really just like any other database. They're not like a relational database where you just kind of store your data for a rainy day. But rather they're kind of in themselves already predefining a little bit the analysis that you intend to do, right? What you turn into nodes, what you turn into edges, that's already kind of intensely analytical knowledge, and it kind of pre-envisions what queries you're going to ask later on. So how does OpenSanctions turn into a graph? Well, there's like a couple of sources of graphiness. One of them is that increasingly some sanctions providers actually provide network information about, for example, how one sanctioned individual relates to another. And that information is, for example, present in the US OFAC dataset. The UK has some information. The Swiss Sanctions Authority publishes this, and so that's like one source of graphiness. And the other source that I mentioned already is politically exposed people. And so what you'll discover, obviously, is that in many countries there's a thin line between what is family and what is government. And we'll look at one of those cases in a minute. And so kind of looking at the family relationships, especially as they're available in the structured data version of Wikipedia for senior high-ranking government officials, it provides interesting graph material in terms of then finding connectivities to other data sets. So what we're going to do today is actually mixing up the pure OpenSanctions data with the offshore leaks database that's been published by ICIJ, the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, as a kind of second data set to connect to, right? Because I think whenever you're doing this kind of graph exploration, the really fun stuff happens between data sets much more than within one data set, unless you've got incredibly rich transactional data that in itself tells a story. So then what you're trying to look at is like, what are the easiest connecting points that we can make between these two data sets prior to going through a full process, for example, of using a machine learning model to predefine full connectivity between these different data sets. And there, what something comes into play, which I would call kind of pivotable properties, right? So let's say a sanctioned individual has 15 defined names, aliases of their names, different spellings, and then some of these might actually show up in an offshore data set as well, or phone numbers, email addresses. These are kind of things that are properties of the sanctioned individual or of the company that we're looking at, but they can themselves be turned into nodes and then be used as connecting nodes between one data set and another. And that's something we're going to explore a lot. The final thing that I want to point out about the way that we've turned OpenSanctions into graph data for this demonstration is that I've taken some of the semantic tags that apply to entities in OpenSanctions and turned them into labels in Neo4j. For example, politician, sanctioned entity, criminal, terrorist, and offshore company. So these are kind of descriptive tags that can be used then later to provide a kind of very intuitive way of writing queries also about these things, right? And we're gonna be looking at some of these queries that really talk in these high-level concepts of connect me, a politician, to an offshore company. And I think that's very charming as a way of thinking about these investigative queries about how to kind of find signs of corruption and money laundering in data sets like this. Finally, and this goes back to how OpenSanctions is different, this entire demonstration that we're about to do is an open source data set. So what you can do is you can, after this presentation, or even if you're very fast following along with the presentation, you can go to GitHub and find a detailed instruction on how to set up your own Neo4j instance and Linkurious instance to contain these data sets, and then basically replicate this. You could, of course, also load in your own data sets to go with this, and basically put in your actual kind of business information, so as to kind of find connectivities between these then three data sets. So right on the one hand, we've got OpenSanctions containing sanctions information and PEPs, and on the other hand, in this demonstration included as well is the offshore leaks database, which includes the published data from the Panama Papers, from the Paradise Papers, and from most recently the Pandora leaks. So actually 5 different really large investigations that looked into offshore ownership and disclosed connectivities between offshore companies and their beneficial owners. So with that, I would propose that we go into the actual demonstration and have some fun with data. Jean, are you up for that?
Very much so. I'm very much looking forward to the demo.
Okay, wonderful. So I want to actually start here on GitHub, where we've shared the code, and I think you'll also find the link to this in the webinar material handout section afterwards. And what you can find here is how to first import the data that we've prepared and that we've released for this demonstration into Neo4j, and then also some advice on how to configure Linkurious to best present the data, and finally a few queries and alerts that you can, for example, use to replicate what I'm about to show you. So let's go here and open up Linkurious. And I want to actually start with an individual that was sanctioned on Tuesday by the United Kingdom in response to the announcement by Vladimir Putin that he was going to recognize two breakaway republics in Ukraine. And so this is Boris Rotenberg. So he was sanctioned by the UK on Tuesday. And if I go to this entry here in Linkurious, I can already see that Boris Rotenberg, he is a sanctioned entity, and we'll talk about that in a second. There's a couple of known aliases for him. So there's different spellings of his names that are recorded in OpenSanctions, as well as a birth date, a country that he's linked to, and a couple of other properties that are defined here. The first thing that I want to show super quickly is that at any point here you can just kind of pop this open also in OpenSanctions and have a look at the kind of profile that we offer on Rotenberg, which includes, for example, highly detailed information on, for example, all the different names that are given to him on different sanctions lists. But going back to Linkurious, what I wanted to show is that if I double tap this gentleman, you can see actually that there's a number of links on connected to Rotenberg already. So this one here is a sanction object. So this is an existing sanction that applies to the Boris Rotenberg. Excuse me. Here's the second one. This is from the Ukrainian National Security and Defense Council, also a sanction from the Australian Department of Foreign Trade and Foreign Affairs and Trade, and finally from the US OFAC office. So when Britain decides that they have now sanctioned Boris Rotenberg, I think the earliest of these is from 2016. So really, they're not announcing anything new. They're kind of just cleaning house, because Boris Rotenberg is already very, very, very extensively sanctioned by a number of jurisdictions, and Britain just forgot to do it. But further than that, there's also two blue nodes here that I want to highlight. And so what these are name nodes, right? So these are nodes that refer to the name Boris Rotenberg, irrespective of what entity it applies to. So if I click to expand here, you can see that actually this connects it to another entity that has the designation Rotenberg Boris. So expanding that, what we're getting to is we're actually getting to a company here. And if I click on this, for example, you can see that this is actually, according to its ID, already data from ICIJ, right? So we've now made the connectivity between this entity here, which is on the sanctions list, to this company here, which is an ICIJ listed offshore leaks company, right? The same thing applies over here. So you can see there's two further Boris Rotenbergs owning a whole set of additional companies. This obviously Rotenberg was already subject of the reporting of ICIJ in 2016 when the Panama Papers were published. So there's very little surprise here, but it shows very nicely how to fit together these different data sets through very simple kind of name nodes that basically link every entity that has the same name here. I want to do one more demonstration of this, and for this I'm going to open up a fresh canvas, go to the dashboard, don't save this, and what I want to do is I want to call up part-time historian and Russian President Vladimir Putin here. So a very fun game that you can play on this is you can have a templated query, right? And before I show how this is configured, let me actually kind of run this one, which is one that I think every investigative journalist dreams of. And it is, yes, tiny Putin to an offshore company, right? So here's a very simple thing that it's done. It says, okay, Vladimir Putin is family with Igor Putin, I think it's his cousin, who has the name Igor Putin, obviously. And Igor Putin then is also the name of an entity in the Panama Papers. Actually, is this Panama or is this Paradise? But anyway, in the offshore leaks database, there's a company here that belongs to Igor Putin, the cousin of Vladimir Putin, right? I want to highlight before making these kind of broad statements that obviously there needs to be validation, right? So here you can see I've got the birthday, for example, for Igor Putin, the cousin of Vladimir Putin, and here in the offshore leaks database, you can see that for this particular entity, I don't actually have a birthday provided. Similarly here. So this would require some further validation. One thing that we could do, for example, is to just search this entity as well, this time not on OpenSanctions, but on the offshore leaks database. So let's run this. And come on, Igor Putin. Here, he is a officer. And see if maybe here they have additional information, but we're not that lucky. All we get is a address, which might already be enough information to kind of provide us further evidence that this is in fact the same individual that we've been looking at on the politician end of the equation. So that I think is already quite a fun way of making these connectivities. So we've just said Vladimir Putin connecting to an offshore, and we end up with a Polymedia corporation. I want to maybe very briefly kind of highlight once more kind of these politician family graphs, right? So here we have the daughter of Putin. We have Sergei Rodugin, who's a famous cellist who also in the Panama Papers was discovered to have an offshore company holding, I think, $2 billion. And here we have Kirill Shamalov, for example, the former son-in-law of Putin, who also came into prodigious wealth as he married Putin's daughter. So you can kind of see the whole network here forming out. And as we would add more data, for example, if we added to this graph, let's say the beneficial ownership database for a country, Cyprus, for example, more and more interesting connections would emerge. I want to show one more family graph just because I'm a big fan of families, and that's this one here. Ilham Aliyev is the president, somewhat autocratic president of Azerbaijan, and what we can do here is just play this expansion game to the max, right? So we have Ilham Aliyev here, Heydar Aliyev is his father, other Heydar Aliyev is his son, Arzu and Leila Aliyeva are both daughters, and Meriban Aliyeva not only is the wife of Ilham Aliyev, but also she's the vice president of the country. So let's start with this. We can look into Meriban Aliyeva, and we see that there's a name node here that has 3 connections on it, and that connects to a whole set of different companies, Rosamond International, UF Universe, and these 2. Rosamond International, on further research, you would find is a company that owns significant real estate in London. And if I play the same game here with Arzu Aliyeva, the younger daughter, then what we can see is that actually Arzu Aliyeva connects to the same UF Universe Foundation, and Arzu Aliyeva also connects to this company, Abo Investments Limited, which, if we finally expand the final bit of the name, you can see just how hefty this graph gets, right? How many connections we have on this. Here we have another company called Exaltation Limited, connected to Arzu Alieva. And finally, we come to Leila Alieva, who is the most business proficient of the family, and she also connects to the UF Universe Foundation. At which point we can be pretty sure this is the actual Aliyev family, right? We've got 3 members of the family involved in this company, and we've also got another company here that is joined between Arzu and Leila Alieva, and we haven't even looked at all of her connections. Here's another entity from the offshore leaks, Leila Alieva, which connects to 2 more management companies. I believe that most of these are actually involved in London real estate as a kind of prime business. And yeah, the more you basically connect this, the more dense this graph becomes. You start finding people like Hassan Ghazal, who are, I think, legal proxies that provide paperwork, and so on and so on. And I think if this isn't the look of a good family structure coming together across boundaries of PEPs data and the Panama Papers, then I don't know how to set this up. I think this is quite a fun little graph of connectivity, just pouring together basically on this very simple construct of putting together the Panama Papers and open sanctions. What I want to highlight here, for example, is that Leila Alieva, as you can see here, has quite a lot of different aliases, thanks to the fact that she is mentioned on a broad variety of Wikidata profiles, but also I think on 1 or 2 sanctions lists. And so you can see that actually the name nodes that come out of Leila Alieva are sometimes this full Azerbaijani spelling of her name, and sometimes the more kind of conventional spellings, right? So these name nodes work better the more kind of different spellings of names you have. Are you still with me, Jean? Does this all make sense?
I'm following every word.
Maybe I want to show super quickly, because this is really something that I find fun, is this query template editor. So basically the way that linking someone to an offshore company, like we just showed with Putin, works is that I'm just saying, find me the current node that's selected, connected via 5 steps to an offshore, and find that connection. So it's a relatively simple cipher query. Yeah, the final little thing that I wanted to demonstrate here, and I'm gonna leave this behind, is this alerting feature, which I would kind of describe as kind of the workflow engine of Linkurious. And the example that I wanted to use here is this alert. Let me dive into it quickly. So this is basically taking sanctioned entities linked to offshores. So it's doing the broad scale of what we've done before. One thing that I did here is, because there are 25,000 sanctioned individuals in offshore in open sanctions, and there are several million entities in the offshore leaks database, I've constrained this to sanctioned entities where the nationality is set to Russia. A somewhat arbitrary choice, but maybe justified by current news events. So what I'm doing here is I'm saying, give me all the sanctioned entities that you can connect to an offshore, and show me kind of the start and the end of each of these paths. And so what I'm getting as a result is this beautiful table that's kind of telling me, oh yes, I have this gentleman here, Vladislav Lemirovich Leontev, and he's connected to a company called Altair Group Holdings, and there are 2 steps between them. Yes, this goes on. We have our Rotenbergs again, and this is, I think, the older brother, cousin of Boris Rotenberg that we looked at previously. Yeah, so you can find these connections, and you can see in total I've got 512 results here. So this basically, working that stack down, should reproduce half of the reporting of the Panama Papers. Let me actually dive into one example here. So I'm just going to somewhat randomly open up this this case here. So it's kind of showing me here on the one end, I've got Arkady Rotenberg, and on the other end, I've got a company in the Offshore Leaks database registered in the Isle of Man and in British Virgin Islands. And again, the connectivity here has been made via this director of the company, or actually the owner of the company, who is connected by name to Arkady Rothenberg, right? So I would you need to go in here and do some more validation, see if I can find, for example, a linked address. What we have here, oh, there's actually more companies connected to this gentleman. And we have an address here, which, for example, we could see if that's reproduced on any of the sanctions lists. Let's see here. We don't actually have an address for Rothenberg himself. Maybe if we're extremely lucky, we could go into one of these companies that are linked to Rothenberg. I think this is a bridge building project in Crimea, and see if this has an address. But we're not lucky enough right now to have these two addresses matched. That would be the kind of way that I would do the validation here, and try to kind of confirm that link between this Rothenberg and this Rothenberg in the offshore leaks. Once we've done that, obviously we can then go and either kind of confirm or dismiss the case, and that way kind of work through our case list. In this particular case, what I would say is that there's actually been media reporting confirming that this is the same Arkady Rothenberg, so I'm going to grant myself that connection for free as a little gift. So going back to the case list, I am now left with only 511 different leads to work out in this investigative scenario. Yeah, John, do you have any additions to this?
Very impressive to see, how to leverage open sanctions, the data from the ICIJ to conduct this type of investigations, and to see all of it come together in the Linkurious Enterprise UI. So very impressive stuff.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's been really fun also to set this up and to kind of really get a sense of how to structure not just kind of the investigation, the kind of graph, but also the workflow around it. I think that's really fun. So maybe let's go back to our presentation. As I said before, just as a final reminder, right, you can do this at home, and I would also be very, very happy for people who do try this out and have questions, run into problems, or have ideas for other public data sets to merge in here, to get in touch and have a conversation about how to do that. I think with Open Sanctions right now, we're in a place where we're really trying to kind of figure out how to make this into a product that really fits into people's needs, and also that is providing surprising and fun investigative insights.
They could thank you so much for the demo. Now I want you to explain and to talk a little bit about how to apply this in practice. So we have seen, different open data sources working together. Of course, what's interesting is how to merge this type of information into your own processes and with your own data. And there's really a few things that need to happen for that to be a success. The first one I would say is to streamline the schema that we have seen. In the demo, we have seen that there were some nodes, for example, the name nodes, that made sense to help consolidate the different data sources, but that you don't necessarily want to make accessible to end users. You basically want to have a more streamlined view of the information, so that it's easier to digest. So that's one example of the sort of tweaks that you will need to do. Another important topic is the entity resolution strategy. So you need to figure out a way to combine your data with open sanctions and to identify the duplicate entities and the entities that are that exist in these two different data sources. Sometimes when you have a unique identifier, that's very easy to do, and there are some of those identifiers within the OpenSanctions dataset. I'm thinking specifically about the Bureau Van Dijk ID as an example. Of course, a lot of times you don't have such a unique identifier, and here you need to use other approaches to figure out whether that Boris Rothenberg that we have seen in one data set is indeed the other Boris Rothenberg that is maybe within your client database. So graph analytics techniques can help out here. I'm thinking about cosine similarity, the connected component algorithms. These are the type of things that can help conduct entity resolution. And we did a webinar recently on that for those of you who are interested to know more. Machine learning can also be helpful. It's a different approach to the same problem, and it can help conduct entity resolution. Another point that I wanted to stress is that it's important to surface these insights about the provenance and the uncertainty of the data to the end users. Maybe you are showing that the client is connected to an entity in an offshore center. It's important to also explain whether that's a certainty, because there's a lot of information that have helped do the entity resolution process, or whether it's more of something that's unclear. And similarly, you want to explain where this insight is even coming from. Is it from the OFAC source, for example, or is it from something else? Okay, so we have seen how to, some tips, some advice on how to apply this in practice. And now I want to showcase an example of how to integrate OpenSanctions in your investigations with Linkurious Enterprise. So we see on the left the different legacy systems in which your data may reside. So you can have internal data, things like KYC information, transactions, but also data coming from existing scoring engines. And this data can be combined with the OpenSanctions data. So Frederic mentioned some of the lists that are curated by OpenSanctions. You can have, for example, information about sanctioned entities. You also have another list about politically exposed person, and you can pick and choose the one that makes sense for your own context. Once you have these different data sources, you need to prepare and enrich this data. There are different data wrangling tools that can help with doing cleaning, doing some basic entity resolution also, or other tasks. If you want to do more advanced things, you can use different data science tools, for example, to leverage machine learning for the entity resolution process, but also to enhance the detection of suspicious anomalies within your data. At the end of the day, all of that needs to be moved to a graph database compatible with Linkurious Enterprise in order for you to leverage the power of Linkurious Enterprise. We support Neo4j and Azure Cosmos DB. So these would be our recommended choices. Then you need to set up Linkurious Enterprise, and you can also configure some query templates to turn repetitive workflows into simple forms or action buttons. And you can also use alerts to streamline the monitoring of your data. Finally, once everything is done, your team of investigators can use Linkurious Enterprise to quickly review suspicious cases and visualize their context for quick and accurate decisions. that's it for today's webinar. I hope that we have answered all the questions that were brought up during today's session. If there are any unanswered questions, we will get to them via email in the coming days. If you want to learn more about OpenSanctions or Linkurious Enterprise, you can reach us at contact@linkurious.com or at info@opensanctions.org.
I hope we hear from some people. I'm really excited to work with people on taking this further towards fixing real investigative needs.
Thank you so much, Frederic, for doing this, and thank you everyone for attending. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.